It's a case of humanity getting by through the skin of its teeth. We're at a former Nike base in Rocky Point, Long Island. It and many Nike and BOMARC bases was set up in the New York metropolitan area in the 1950s to blast Soviet bombers out of the sky with nuclear-tipped Nike and BOMARC missiles. These were the first generation of anti-aircraft missiles, so they weren't seen as being able to score direct hits. So instead, the scheme was to have the nuclear warheads on the Nike and BOMARC missiles detonate when they reached a formation of Soviet bombers blowing the formation apart, but also raining radioactivity down below. This facility in Rocky Point and the others were closed as the Soviets switched from bombers to intercontinental ballistic missiles. The nuclear tips had enormous power. For the BOMARCs, the equivalent of 10 kilotons. The atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima, Japan, had the TNT equivalent of 13 kilotons. The Nike missiles had the power of up to 20 and 30 kilotons. The BOMARCs had a 250-mile range, the Nikes a 100-mile range. It would have been some radioactive rain if they were ever put into use. Here's the guts of the former Nike base in Rocky Point. This is an access hatch which permits soldiers to go down below into a cavernous area where the missiles were stored, the nuclear-tipped Hercules Nike missiles. And if we walk here through all this grass, all quite overgrown, here's the launch site itself. Huge doors, I'd say 40, 50 feet long, welded shut now. They would open, the missile would rise to be fired at those feared Soviet bombers heading to New York City. This is a ventilation unit designed to bring air to the cavern below where the missiles were stored, to take air out, to provide ventilation. This is another launch site at the former Nike missile base in Rocky Point. You can see the length and those pieces of metal along where the doors meet. That welds this launch site closed, hopefully forever. There's no missiles down here anymore, thank heavens. Here are the remnants of the circuit breaker box, the electrical supply for the former Nike base. Overgrown now, not only with various weeds, but also poison ivy, kind of fitting. This is another access point to the cavern below where the silos were for the Nike missiles. It's all shut down now. There's master locks on these doors. Danger, it's an old sign, confined space, enter by permit only, it says. This is one of 4 support buildings at the former Nike base. They've all been declared historical structures, and though the Army plans to renovate them, the Army will have to be very careful about the guidelines for any kind of reconstruction of an historical building. Interestingly, there's a sign sitting here. Let me just look at it. which sort of signals the military importance of this area. Restricted area. This activity has been declared a restricted area by authority of the commanding general in accordance with the provisions of the directive issued by the Secretary of Defense in August 1954. Unauthorized entry is prohibited. All persons and vehicles entering herein are liable to search, photographing, or making notes, drawings, maps, or graphic representations of this area or its activities are prohibited unless specifically authorized by the commander. Any such material found in possession of unauthorized persons will be confiscated. Well, decades later, we can take photos here. This is the guard booth at the former Nike base in Rocky Point. Guards were here, armed guards were here, posted 24 hours a day. This building, too, has been designated an historical structure. This building involves the power supply for the Nike base. There were transformers, since taken away, I'm told, and other equipment here to provide the juice, to provide the electricity for the site. The missiles themselves, of course, had their own fuel ready to go, ready to power them upwards. Although the missiles at this former Nike base are long gone, the area itself is still in active use by the Army. It's an Army Reserve Center. Indeed, behind me is a new state-of-the-art training and administration building for that function. We're at the former BOMARC base in Westhampton. Here, 56 nuclear-tipped missiles were poised and ready to go. Each of these buildings, look at all these buildings here, had a missile in it. Indeed, the roofs of the buildings would open up. We'll see that in a few minutes. The missile would rise, be ready to be fired. Gil Anderson, you're the commissioner of the Suffolk Department of Public Works.
Yes, sir.
And now you're the owner of this place.
Yes, we're in charge of the facility now. The facility was turned over to the county in '72 after it was decommissioned in '69 by the federal government.
They took the missiles away.
Yes, they did, but they left us everything else. And we use this now as a storage facility primarily. We store records in one of the buildings. Each of these silos has the potential to store whatever's needed for various divisions of the county, and we take advantage of it. And then there's also the impound yard. There's a shooting range right over to the north of us, and we make good use of the site.
Now, back in the 50s, early 60s, the concern was Soviet bombers probably heading to New York City.
Correct.
That was the concern, and this facility, along with the various Nike bases in the New York metropolitan area, would fire off these nuclear-tipped missiles, but they didn't have the technology then to score direct hits.
Correct.
So the deal was you get that missile right in the middle of a formation of Soviet bombers, have it detonate,
Right.
and the bombers would seemingly fall to earth. But
Right.
with the radiation, though.
Correct. These were radar controlled, so they would, with radar, control the direction of the missile until it got into the group of, bombers and would explode. And yes, unfortunately, there would be, there would be the radiation that would fall out.
You're a child of the
Yes, sir.
of the 50s, 60s too. Right?
Correct. Yes, I remember very well the old duck and cover exercises that we had to do as kids.
As now the proprietor of this place, having been from a duck and cover generation, in public school, I too was trained to. You went under the desk, and you had dog tags too in those days.
Yeah.
How do you kind of feel, sort of eerie, sort of on the beachish, at this former BOMARC base, being here, considering your background?
It is eerie, the quiet, still seeing the structures, in place. I mean, they were built solid. You look at the concrete, the steel's rusty, but it's still there. It brings back the memory of those times. Although, to be honest with you, I'm glad and I hope we are past those times.
You'd hope.
Yeah.
Let's take a walk.
Sure.
Look at one of these buildings. They're all the same. There's 56 of these.
Correct.
56 of the structures. Here's
4 rows. This was where they would roll them in. These doors would open up, and essentially, the missile would be on a cradle that would roll in here. If they, and thankfully they never had to, if they did have to be launched, the roof would essentially roll off in either direction, split down the middle, and then, as you said, the missile would rise and then would be launched.
looking here in terms of what's left. This is an empty. What would you call this thing?
Basically, just an empty silo. That's really what it is. It's like a garage. It's a concrete structure, 2 walls of concrete, solid concrete floor, and then steel doors on either side with the roof that rolled back, steel roof.
When the roof comes together, and thank heavens it's together today, is it a good seal?
Yes, it is. It's still to this day watertight, as you can see. A little water gets in here and there, but considering these are over 50 years old, it's amazing how well these are upheld.
And there's lights of some sort that.
Yeah.
What are those about?
Those were part of the facility. They were, if you had to do any work at night or get in here at night, you wanted to be able to see where you were going. So these basically lit up the missiles. So if they had to do any work on it, they do any maintenance on a building, they could see where they were going.
And that, what is that, a heater, that thing there?
To be honest with you, I don't know.
Let's take a look. Let's take a look.
Looks like it's an old vent. I believe it's just an old vent. These would open up similar to Venetian blinds and allow air in if you needed. There doesn't seem to be any other equipment for air conditioning or anything like that, and it wouldn't have been needed.
You look at the rule. It's quite a proposition there. I mean, you're an engineer.
Yeah. No, there's a lot of work and a lot of detail and a lot of effort went into these facilities. This was a sign of the time.
And up there, what is that? Those are kind of like rollers?
Yeah, essentially that's the track that it ran on, and as these were needed to open up, they followed the beam, and they rolled on those tracks with those little teeth on there, and it would just follow its way on either side and open up.
Wow, and then, of course, those warning cautious hazardous doors would be warning people about, well,
it was just a means of telling you that you had a door here and it did open or did close. If it was open, they would likely be opening. Well, I guess it could open either way. So you had to let everybody know it was a door. They had to have access. You do have a man door over there, so you had a secondary access as well as you had the access on the doors themselves. A lot of our new facilities, you can see, we've put new fronts on it, had them locked up, but still the main structure, the roof and the sides and the floor are in very, considering their age and the minimal maintenance that have they been upkept, they're in pretty good shape.
Well, Suffolk County has done a nice job recycling
Yes.
this place, but still just to consider that this place existed. Also, I mean, we're talking about nuclear devices, and serious, heavy-duty nuclear warheads here.
Correct.
Was ever a check made about residual radiation or radioactivity on this site?
Not that I know of, but I really don't know.
Because there were some accidents in some of these Nike and BOMARC facilities through the years with radiation.
To the best of my knowledge, there was never one here. I've never had any. No one's ever told me about it in the time I've been here.
Gil, some of the old missile silo buildings have better doors than. I see one there.
Correct. We installed those. If they're, the department has the option if it's needed that it could. If it needs to be secured, we will construct, as you see here, rolling doors or man doors or depending on the level of security they need. I believe that's a sheriff's silo, so that's by the sheriff's department. So they, I don't know what they have in there, but they wanted it secure so that we put a new face on it.
Was there ever any interest? There's a lot of acreage you have, or 300 acres on this site.
Right.
Any interest in just getting rid of these old buildings and I don't know what you'd put up here, affordable housing? And this is Westhampton. Imagine how much this land would go for per acre.
It wasn't as much. We did a study a couple of years ago, I think. We had a consultant come around and looking at vacant county land. And this one, because of the amount of work you would have to do to remove all this concrete, it would actually, it wasn't worth that much. You have the power plant over there, which we might be able to take a peek in, but the old power plant, the old maintenance facility, you have all these silos. It's a fair amount of work. That's why the federal government just kind of left it and gave it to us.
Gil, here's a whole other collection of these missile silos.
Yes, there were, as you said earlier, there were 4 rows of them, each 14, totaling 56. This one, as you can see, it's been vacant. There are some being used for storage, as the one right over there. The police do practice maneuvers in here with, driving maneuvers, and they're just sitting fallow. We use them where we can and where they're wanted. Otherwise, the amount of upkeep that's required is pretty minimal.
Solid concrete bunkers, really.
Yeah, absolutely. They're huge. I mean, the amount of concrete. It would probably be considered overkill these days, but back then, they had the money and they took advantage of it. The advantage was just to open it up, allow air in. The lighting that's still in place.
Now, that's another kind of light. See that light up there?
Right.
Now that looks like it was like
probably red. Yeah, I mean, I'm guessing it was some type of emergency lighting, maybe warning lighting. If the thing opened up, there had to be some means to warn everybody beyond just the fact that you saw it opening, some type of alarm system or alert system.
Yeah, I mean, if we go here, this is red, and this takes some forensic electrical analysis here, but it looks to me that maybe that was the light that would shine when things got ready to
rock and roll.
go into action here.
Absolutely, yeah. I would imagine that once these doors started to open up, or immediately prior to it, these lights would start to light up, and then that would signal that to be careful, and the doors were opening up.
Wow. Oh, and here, let's look at this. This is I wonder what this is. Hard to tell.
It's a switch of some type.
I wonder if that's the button that launches it.
No, I don't. I don't know. I wouldn't imagine it was. You wouldn't want to be in the same area where the missile would go off.
Sure.
So, because there would be, burn off as it's going up. So, but you do have you have that bank of regular lights. You have the bank of the red lights. You can see where the steel beams actually split and went in either direction. And again, you have those, that sawtooth.
Some 4th of July celebration. This would be.
Thankfully, it was never used. It would roll up on. And that was likely the motor right there that controlled it.
There's always been a sense of great peace here, always has been for me. Farming communities, people connected to the land. This was something that I think really altered something in us in human beings when we chose to go down the nuclear path. And recently I was watching a redo of 2001, Stanley Kubrick's movie. And in that movie, there's a scene where a pre-human being is kind of toying with a bone and hits a bone, and it's kind of a technological breakthrough, which the bone becomes a tool and a weapon, and it flips up in the air, and then the next scene you see something curling through space, and my understanding that's a nuclear weapon. that there's something innate in human beings that with these advances in technology, one of the first things we think of comes out of our fear base, that we have to develop a weapon to threaten other species. And I think, age upon age, there have always been men and women that tell us that the answer isn't fear-based, it's love-based. And I think it's a miracle that we have survived, the human species has survived to this point, because I think there was something, I don't know what it was, that kept us from using these weapons, but there's such an insanity that's part of this experience. Because, for example, the post office has developed a plan to deliver the mail after a nuclear war. I think we understand at some deep level that that's insane. And yet the rational mind tries to say, well, no, it's not, because we're going to have a nuclear war, then we're going to deliver the mail. There's something, a very deep part of the human being that really has to be exposed and contained so that we don't make some fatal mistake to basically end all life on this planet.
On the issue of nuclear technology, and, well, particularly back then in the 50s and 60s, its acceptance, what do you think that signifies?
I think it signifies people really weren't aware of what was happening at a deep level. I think people trusted the government in those days. They were basically people who had survived the war and knew about enemies. And I think the consciousness at the time allowed for this type of expression without real questioning. I think the real questioning comes in the 60s when that complete trust in authority breaks down and say, hey, explain it to me, show me, prove it to me. I think that was very healthy. That gets downplayed and poo-pooed, but I think that was a very healthy part of it, a healthy part of human nature coming to the fore, saying, hey, let's question where we're going. Let's question what we're doing to make sure that we agree with it and that it's life-affirming.
And now in the 2010s, we're certainly living in a different culture. Some people talk about a dumbing down of society. Maybe we would be more accepting of all this kind of craziness now than ever?
I agree with the fact that, average people are also complicit in what's happening here. There's no boogeyman. Yes, we're being dumbed down, but we're accepting being dumbed down. We're accepting that there is, in our culture, in the American culture, there's some group of people who want to perpetuate eternal war. When Dick Cheney talked about endless war, when Donald Rumsfeld talks about endless war, now the Pentagon is talking about perpetual war. That means that they're trying to bring to a realization that there will never be an end to war and trying to get people to accept that. To me, that policy is insane. Unless we, as average Americans, raise our voices and demand that the people who make money from war, there's a lot of people who make a tremendous amount of money from war, who want to propagate, the war philosophy. Unless we find a way to change that, this is going to go on forever. I had hoped that possibly Obama was going to change that. And he's just part of the same machine, the same war machine, doesn't have the courage to stand up. And so it doesn't make any difference who the leader is. The foreign policy of the United States is based on militarism, it's based on war, it's based on bullying. And then we see in our own country where people talk about trying to have anti-bullying programs, trying to keep children from harming each other. We see all these shootings. Well, if the policy of the government expresses those values, that's what we're going to get in this country. We're going to die from within. We're not going to die from some external enemy. We're destroying ourselves as human beings and as a culture.
What can we do about it?
I think it takes men and women who have tremendous courage, who have tremendous love, who are willing to stand up and actually say that war is not the answer, that violence is not the answer. and express it in their own lives. And I don't think, and I think when there's enough people to do that, and I think it is a magical moment. It doesn't take a lot of people. Change, I think, has been shown to come when 1 to 3% of a population forms a certain consciousness, then everybody gets that consciousness. So it doesn't take a lot of us to do it, and I'm really hopeful that we will be able to do that.
Bill McNulty, what do you think about these nuclear-tipped missile sites all over Long Island, all over the New York metropolitan area a few decades ago?
I had no idea that they existed. I knew that there was a missile base in Rocky Point, but I had no idea that those missiles were capable of carrying nuclear warheads. I'm very shocked by that.
You've been a peace activist for many years. What does this signify?
Well, my peace activism actually came late in life by comparison to others. It was the Gulf War I that got me thinking that there was something drastically wrong. And as I began to look more deeply into the realities that concern the way our government does business, I really, at this stage of the game, I'm not too surprised to find out that we were beneath these nuclear-tipped missiles, potentially bringing danger and destruction to not only the bombers, but to us.
That kind of, I don't know, mentality that would set up nuclear-tipped missiles, which would, I mean, if people would be downwind from that radioactivity as it dispersed, or if it would be overhead, I mean, the thinking or the lack of thinking that would go into that sort of scheme is really something, no?
You know, I guess we could look back and we could give some justification for it. People did what they thought was necessary in order to protect the population. But I'm always concerned about what goes before that. In other words, what are we as a nation doing that might provoke people into wanting to attack us? That's the thing that bothers me to this day. I'm of the opinion that the policies that the government carry out, they offend a lot of people, and people are offended to such an extent that they would be willing to do harm to us. When the question is asked, why would anyone want to do something like this to us? And our answer is because they hate our freedoms, that's too simplistic. So in that context, I'm not surprised at the government putting us in that kind of danger. They were doing it based upon the assumption and the thinking that they were protecting the population, but they're protecting a population that they're endangering to begin with by virtue of how they conduct themselves throughout the world. That's the way I've come, that's the conclusion I've come to at this time.
On the issue of nuclear devices and nuclear weapons, I mean, we have scores and hundreds of intercontinental ballistic missiles on hair-trigger alert to this day. I mean, this is a show about the 50s and the 60s, but here we are 50, 60 years later, and the nuclear threat is still very much with us.
It's still with us, and a friend of mine, Phil Berrigan, now deceased, used to talk about the nuclear weapon. And he talked about it in terms of it being the taproot of the violence. And that was true and probably still continues to be true, although as we continue our militarism, we develop weapons that are even more threatening than the nuclear weapon, more lethal nuclear weapons that are capable of doing much, much more. But I'm an advocate of nonviolence, and I would prefer, and I advocate on behalf of, our government conducting diplomacy instead of war making.
As I've said, humanity has gotten by the skin of its teeth so far. This has been a special report for WVVH-TV. I'm Karl Grossman. Thanks for watching.